Well, hey, EFCA family, our district conference is coming up very soon, February 21st and 22nd at Fellowship Bible Church in Waco, Texas. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to meet our main speaker for the conference, Shane Stacey. So welcome, Shane. How are you doing?
Doing one great, man. Really grateful to be step into this opportunity with you and be back with some of the EFCA family.
Yeah, great. Well, you're coming to us from Minneapolis, correct?
It's true. I appreciate you guys rolling out the white carpet for me already. I hear you guys getting a little snow down there and
We've
things, and
got
so
the
thanks for making me. You got that Southern hospitality, making people feel welcome. I appreciate it.
That's right. Our white carpet is melting, unfortunately, and I hope it stays melted for our conference. But yeah, yeah. No, we're. I grew up in Wisconsin, but I'm a soft Texan now. I don't like this cold, so I'm glad it's getting warmer. But you Eskimos up in Minneapolis, you
True.
you live with this what 9 months out of the year, something like that.
It's true. It's
Yeah,
true. The Lord's banished us to some. My wife and I, we call them their exile years up here in the upper Midwest. So
yeah, yeah. Well, I do miss the summers from the Midwest, but
that's
anyway.
true.
Well, hey, thank you so much for agreeing to speak at our conference. I've enjoyed getting to know you and just really appreciate your heart. And I would love for just some of our church leaders who are out there watching just to get a flavor for who you are and hear a little bit about you. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about your story, yourself, your ministry experience, and I know you have a heart for making disciples, and that's really kind of our theme for the conference is building a disciple making culture. So how did you develop that heart? So just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me start with ministry things, then come back to that because I think there's some early connections to where that disciple making seed was planted. But yeah, there's a up here in Minneapolis now, but where Heather and I and cut our teeth in ministry was out in New Jersey. First time we were introduced actually to an EFCA church was Montvale, New Jersey. We were just outside of New York City. And Frank Sinatra said, "If you can make it there, Brent, you can make it anywhere." And so we didn't know though our next anywhere would be in the middle of nowhere, and it was Fargo, North Dakota. God called us to Bethel Evangelical Free Church, and we definitely did not move there for the weather or the geography. It was a wonderful about 10 years with the folks up there, and it's a college town and I was next gen, pastor there. We had a college ministry of about 600 at the time, and I got to serve on the teaching team there as well. And then while we were there, we thought we would be there for years, and got a knock on the door from the EFCA national team, and just asked if I'd join the team, in particular around Next Generation Ministries at the time. And so we moved here to Minneapolis, south to get warm, in Minneapolis. And we served with the national team for about a decade, and really was around helping youth ministries in particular gain just a disciple making clarity and culture. And then that just grew from there. My last few years in particular with working with whole church teams, we were beginning to find, if you just look at one ministry area in a church, it doesn't mean that we're all necessarily on the same page. So we started working with whole church teams, and come back to that maybe in a little bit. And then I served there for about 10 years, and then just was feeling a little bit more like a practitioner or a professor than a practitioner. And so stepped back into a local church context here in South Minneapolis with a dear friend, Steve Hudson, who actually served in the EFCA for many years as well, and trying to help a large church that was, had a tractional model move to more of a disciple making culture. And then from there, stepped into working with now my co-laborer, Dave Rhodes. We started Clarity House about 2.5 years ago, and really specifically to help churches with what I would describe as shared vision that's fueled with disciple making clarity. So that's a little ministry journey along the way. But to your question of where did that start? It started 35 years ago, and I didn't know it was starting at the time. I was 15 years old, Brent, and my youth pastor was still to this day, I think, one of the best disciplers I've ever met. And his impact and imprint on my life was dramatic, not just about youth ministry, but actually introducing me to Jesus's way of life, And so at 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, we're studying the life of Christ and how did Jesus create movements. And I'll be honest, I didn't know what he was doing at the time. I think that's a lot of times what happens with good disciple making culture is you don't even know what's happening. It's not like you signed up for a program. It's just it's what's being invested into you. It's what's being embodied and modeled around you. And I didn't realize it for about 10 years. And suddenly, as you know, the longer I was in ministry, I'm just doing certain things, and partly the things I was doing was realizing that this was imprint from Rudy on my life, and then from there, it really has been. I mean, people often ask, like, who have been your biggest disciple making influences, and you can name Alan Hirsch and all these different books that you and I have read, and authors that you and I have read. But I would go back again, not because it's the right answer to say Jesus, but truly, I mean, I think what has shaped me the most has been reading over and over with groups of people and studying the life of Jesus and asking, what does first century disciple making look like in a 21st century fill in the blank culture? And how do we replicate that, in the culture that we, specifically live in? And then all those other influences, I always say we're all using the same source text, so it kind of brings it back down to that. So I'd say that's really where it started. I didn't know it was starting then, but that's where it was starting.
Yeah, that's great. It's great. I think a lot of times in churches we equate activity with results,
Yeah,
and the fact that we've got a full calendar means we must be making disciples, and yet there's not always a connection.
yeah.
And so, as you think about your ministry experience, the things you've learned, the churches you've served, what would you see as some of the biggest obstacles to churches really leaning into an effective disciple making ministry?
Yeah, number of things come to mind. So do we have a few hours that we can wrestle with together? And this is more on what have we learned over the last number of years too, just personally on that. One, let's just name this, Brent. Like, I think it's helpful to name that there's a lot that has changed outside of the church, before we even look at the church itself. And I think that's part of it. Like, there's so much that has shifted in culture in the last 5, 6 years in particular in a rapid way, obviously in the last, 20 years.
Mhm.
And so then, just I think we all just kind of like there needs to be a fresh empathy, for that
Yeah,
reality. I was talking
yeah.
with a church planner, a regional leader in our area, and he's planted multiple churches and a church planting church. And he said, his name's Steve, and Steve said, when he planted a church back in the 2000s, like pretty much if you could communicate well, if you could set up shop and you could grow a church. And he just named today it is very, very different, very, very different in what's happening in culture as we're growingly post-Christian context. But then I think that right there is maybe some of what gets in the way for us as a church, because in many ways, many of us are still functioning on a model of ministry that was very effective 20 and 30 and 40 years ago, but not necessarily as helpful as we think about engaging this next generation and what's happening in culture. So that would be one thing, and we'll talk about it a little bit even in our time together. I think that we would say that today, in many ways, the functional Great Commission that I think tends to be in the mind maybe of churchgoers, even church leaders, is go into all the world and make worship attenders, baptize them in the name of small groups, and teach them how to serve a few hours a month. And while that would not be what Jesus had in mind. And again, I don't say that to be critical. I mean I've played that playbook on that, but I think in the minds for many of us that kind of model has stuck, and yet culture is shifting significantly, and so making those adjustments. And then Brent, you named another one, and that is around. I think we're oftentimes over programmed and under discipled, and the more programs you have to manage, the less people development that manages to happen. And I think for a lot of church leaders, you can start to feel like we all got into this because we wanted to make disciples. And then all of a sudden you can feel like somehow I got hoodwinked to run a church, instead, in that too. So I think that becomes a reality as well, Brent. And then if I was just name one more, I think we have put a lot, and this is a very positive thing, a lot of imagination into teaching in the last 50 years. And my hope, and even some of what Dave and I really are trying to work with at Clarity House, is just helping churches put more imagination in this next 50 years into training. And how do we build a training culture that is raising and releasing people into the places where they live, work, and play?
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's not an either or, it's a both and. Like teaching is
Absolutely.
necessary. Let's continue to grow in
Totally.
that area, but this is an area that oftentimes gets neglected. And even programs, I mean, every program starts usually with a disciple making focus in mind, but it can lose its focus over time. So just making sure we're
Absolutely.
always
Yeah.
evaluating things in light of that lens. Yeah, that's good. Well, give us a little sneak preview, little trailer as to maybe what we can expect
Yeah.
from your main sessions, and then you're also going to be doing a workshop on Saturday for our conference.
Yeah. So main sessions, thanks. Again, and maybe this is me showing my cards a little bit, but one of the places I always, find myself going back to anytime we're wrestling with these kind of conversations is what do we see? How did Jesus wrestle with this?
Mhm.
That Jesus isn't just our message and our model, but I think he gives us, a playbook for movement as well. And so we're going to step into Mark chapter 3 in our first plenary session together. There's something that's going on in Jesus' ministry. There's a crisis in essence going on. There is external forces that are pushing. There's supernatural forces that are pushing. There's internally things that are going on that are seeking to detour Jesus' ministry, and he makes a significant and critical shift that ends up ensuring not only his ministry, but the future of the church. And I think there's a lot that, Brent, we can learn from that, even in the pressures and in the things that we're feeling as church leaders today.
Mhm.
And so we'll step into that a little bit. And then in the second plenary session, we'll actually just flip the page to Mark 4 and 5. And there's a little phrase where Jesus says to his disciples, let's go to the other side. And I think a lot of us really, when we think about a disciple making culture, some of what we're talking about is where are we today and what are some of the shifts we need to make to move to the other side and what that other side may be for each of us in our unique contexts. And there is some incredible, I think, disciple making principles that we see in that little passage and what happens in the in between, what I call the
Mhm.
messy middle, as well. So we'll look at that a little bit, and then the workshop will focus specifically on personal calling and activating personal calling in the lives of everyday people as a disciple making accelerant. One of the things that we have found over the last number of years is as you're empowering the organism of the church, people will step into that. When you see that first, second, third generation, maybe of disciples, people have an intuitive sense of calling. But by that second, that third, fourth generation, you're handing them discipling tools, and they oftentimes don't even know why. And so, part of what we'll zero in on there is how do we help awaken and activate personal calling for people to be able to clarify what I would describe as the depth of their purpose, their unique purpose, in a way that intersects with the scope of their influence. And by scope of their influence, I mean, who are the people in the place that God is sending them to, or where they have the greatest impact and that can bring the greatest gospel impact to. But I think that comes from a place oftentimes of clarifying first, how is it that God's designed them? I
Yeah.
often go back, Brent, to quick on that is just Ephesians, 2:8-9. I think most Christians know what they've been saved from, but they don't know what they've been saved for.
Yeah.
And Ephesians 2:10 says there's a workmanship. We are God's workmanship, recreated in Christ Jesus to do good works that He's prepared in advance us to do. It's really helping awaken people to what is that dream that God's been dreaming for them, and the places and the people in which they can bring the greatest gospel impact and influence to.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that, Shane, and I really love your heart for disciple making. As you know, it was my privilege to go through your Clarity House
Yeah,
certification training
yeah,
last year. I love the tools you guys are creating for discipleship for churches. In fact, I'm putting our regional directors through that training because I want to be able to
yeah.
equip our churches to do it. And so I'm excited that our church is going to be able to benefit from your wisdom at our district conference. The theme is building a disciple-making culture. And again, if you want to move from just activity to results, really building a culture of discipleship that actually does what Jesus has called us to do, that's going to be the focus of our conference. And so, again, that's February 21st and 22nd, Fellowship Bible Church in Waco, Texas. Everybody's welcome. Bring your wives, your elders, your leadership team. Leave your pets at home. But other than that, pretty much everybody can come. And you can check out our district website. There's a banner at the top that gets you all the information you need to register and to get information about the conference. So, Shane, thank you so much for joining us. Look forward to seeing you in just a few weeks here. And look forward to seeing you all as well at our district conference. Have a great day, and thank you so much.